Eskom announced stage 2 load shedding in South Africa. Now, the latest blackout started at 10 a.m. on Wednesday and is expected to last till 10 p.m. on Sunday due to delays in returning generating units. According to the state-owned power utility, breakdowns currently total 13,752 megawatts of capacity, while planned maintenance is 1,273 megawatts of capacity. In a statement, Eskom said the capacity constraints will continue for the foreseeable future, and all South Africans are urged to reduce their use of electricity, particularly between 1700 and 2200 when the winter demand is the highest. The service disruption emanated from 5 power stations. Our focus today is South Africa's load shedding cost. I'm Tolulope Adeleru-Balogun. This is Business Edge. Now joining me from Johannesburg, South Africa is Ntombana Mbele. She is an economist at Somnotho Holdings and will be going through the issues with Eskom as well as the implications for South Africa's struggling economy at this point. Now, Ntombana, thank you so much for joining me again on Business Edge. Welcome to the show.
It's always a pleasure. Thank you for having me.
So unfortunately, we're back in this conversation again. We're back in this situation with South Africa again. There was, of course, we saw the rescue plan. We saw some moves, some possible money here and there. But why are we having this type of load shedding, stage 2 load shedding happening right now in South Africa?
Absolutely. So I think it's also now we are currently on stage 3 load shedding. And as I'm talking to you right now, I have no power in my house. That's the reason why we could not have a visual interview. So this already just, shows the extent that is creating a challenge in South Africa into the way of doing business. So if you are a company that is in the manufacturing space, is one that is in the retail space, is one that does restaurants and food service, this kind of load shedding presents a very material challenge to your company, production, to your earnings, and ultimately to you being able to sustain employment with the people that are currently in your workforce. So it is material. The load shedding effect in South Africa is material and continues to be one of the high downside risks to South Africa's growth currently.
In that statement that Eskom released, they talked about seasonal demand. The winter months come in and they know that seasonal demand is high. But seasonal demand is nothing new, particularly for Eskom. And one would have expected that Eskom would somehow have been prepared for the demand that comes in the winter months. Why do you think this is not the case?
I think the continuous mismanagement within the Eskom team and then being able to understand the seasonal effects of winter has continued to prevail for over the last 3 years. So this is not the first year that we experienced in load shedding. And you remember that last year, because we also had a halt in production due to the hard lockdown and restrictions in mobility, there really was not much economic activity happening. So the pressure towards the electricity was not as significant as it is now. Currently, you remember that companies are in the strategic economic space of wanting to get back the missed time and the missed production from COVID last year. And so because they want to increase their production, the capacity required from Eskom, particularly from their power stations, becomes constrained because of the mismanagement risk in the forest that the technical expertise, the technical issues that Eskom has within their power stations, such as Mabuti, is addressed timely. So one cannot sit here and say that Eskom would have made it not forecasted for this. I think what they do is now is that they've also indoctrinated South Africans and made the load shedding reality something that Africans need forecast for in their lives, and also then generate the alternative energy generation such as generators with alternative increases the input costs of doing business in South Africa, which is conducting their days, as you can see right now. If I don't have a generator, pretty much most millions in the majority of South Africans are not able to engage in global activities. So that already poses the immediate challenge that the power outages present to the South African economy.
And it's interesting that even as we're having this conversation, we can see you in this situation of load shedding that many millions of South Africans are going through. So let's talk about that generation capacity right now. So Eskom's generation division has some 13 coal-fired power stations, which have about an installed capacity of 37,745 megawatts. Currently, it is 5 of these generating power stations that have issues. There have repeatedly been issues with the coal-fired power stations, maintenance, shutdowns, even just making sure that they stay online. When we look at where the world is going in terms of fossil fuel emissions and climate change, one also has to wonder if Eskom has made any plans to become more environmentally friendly and sustainable, because is this the way the country is going to continue to go in this situation?
I think, the most important conversation and question, because what you're highlighting is the fact that we already have capacity constraint when it comes to coal generation of power. And because globally we are part of the Paris Agreement that signed for climate change and ensuring that we have green growth going forward that does not harm the environment. Currently, there have been no signs that have been made publicly by Eskom or the government of continuously building renewable energy. The conversation was quite right in 2019, pre-COVID times, but currently it has not really resurfaced and become, a part of the status quo and the dialogue around energy supply in this economy. And as you rightfully put it, as you can see, Eskom right now is failing to create capacity with its what the technical glitches that 5 of its power stations is experiencing. And so what that is showing you is that the issue of coal and managing and technically being able to manage coal to have it to be effective and efficient in generating power has failed in South Africa. That is clear, that is evident. The conversation that the state should therefore be moving towards with private sector, because private sector is predominantly the most affected sector, apart from households, but for generating output and production, they're the ones that feel the brunt more. And for them to not have to operate in an economy that requires them to include generators as their input cost, they should also engage with government and have a partnership and a cooperative partnership to say the world is moving towards a new sustained energy regeneration that is outside of coal. How do we ensure that renewable energy becomes practical, and we will then fund and give the financial muscle to enable this exercise to become fruitful?
True. So I want to expand it just a bit, because we're talking about Eskom, which is the state-owned power entity for South Africa, which is the most industrialized nation on the continent. We can go to Eastern Africa and look at KenGen and the issues they're having. If you come to the West, we can look at the issues that the power holding company of Nigeria is having, even though Nigeria has privatized power, electricity distribution in the country. There's also issues in Ghana right now with Doomsor coming back as well. But what we see is that it seemingly seems that African countries or African governments cannot provide the necessary power that their economies need for their economies to grow. Is this showing us that we need to drive more private sector or more privatization of state-owned electricity companies across the continent? Or is it telling us that, once again, as many people say, governments have no business doing business? But some would say they need to be sure of how electricity is being generated, that it could also be a security issue. What do you think about that?
I think the conversation around governments not being involved in the business of supplying electricity is fair in modern economies that are equitable in their economic participation. By equitable, I mean you understand that the African continent historically comes from there being to lots of words, there not being equitable distribution of resources, right? And because of that, the discrimination that the legacy of the discrimination finds governments being necessary to regulate the prices of electricity. If in a utopian environment where all African, in respective countries would be able to afford electricity at growing market price, that would be the most, idealistic approach to it. But we don't operate in that kind of economy. We operate in an economy where most Africans are marginalized. Most Africans live below the breadline. And so if you're going to engage in a free market system in the energy supply, you are therefore indirectly excluding the majority of the population in the African continent. And so therefore, governments being entrusted through the vote of individuals and of Africans is therefore requested and mandated by that vote to regulate the prices of electricity, to become a key player in the energy distribution in the African continent, to ensure that every single household and business, be it a big multinational or small, enterprise, is able to generate production through, having access to electricity. And so I do not think that the idea that we should exclude government from the generation of power is applicable in the African continent for the reasons that I've stated. I do believe that the cooperation for incentives exists with the private sector to also be effective in ensuring that they handle the business of generating power. The regulation of power should be given to the state.
Okay, we're going to take time out. When we come back, let's get into how this has been affecting the South African economy. There are those that have said that because of this load shedding issue, South Africa's economy is actually 25% smaller than it actually should be. What is the cost of load shedding in South Africa? The conversation continues right after this. My guest is still with me, South African economist Ntombana Mbele. Now, Ntombana, we've seen the South African government open up bidding for more than 11,800 megawatts of power that should be coming from independent power producers. This is including renewable energy, natural gas, and battery storage, as well as coal. Do you think that this move can make a difference to the energy shortage, the electricity shortage that South Africa is experiencing?
Appreciate the inflow of megawatts to assist the challenge, but I can confidently say it's not going to be enough to materially impact production and to materially assist with the load shedding crisis that we are in.
Okay. So as far back as 2015, the International Monetary Fund had warned that load shedding in South Africa was contracting, was affecting the economy. It's also been estimated that South Africa's economy could actually be 25% bigger than it is if it wasn't for the fact that there were the rolling blackouts that are costing the economy. Let me also add what economist Professor Gianni Rousseau has said. He said that the country has lost 1.275 trillion rand because of load shedding. What do you think the cost of this has been for the South African economy?
Interesting to note is that on the first quarter GDP 2021 number that came out just recently, we saw that the GDP numbers was 1.1 for the first quarter from January up until March. And what that already shows to you is that compared to the 2020 Q1 GDP figure, we were 2.7% below as a result of load shedding, as a result of the inability to increase production capacity because that becomes constrained by power outages and the supply of power. And so he's absolutely right. The material impact for economic growth in South Africa from the electricity crisis, as I mentioned to you earlier, affects fundamentally the growth potential of this economy. And taking into consideration that not being the only constraint that we have, we also have the vaccine challenge. That already shows to you that the increase in the challenges, fundamental structural challenges that we have in South Africa, quite hinder the ability of growth to be in a sustained level that will create positive real outputs for the South African economy.
So there are some over 2.3 million small and medium enterprises in South Africa. These businesses employ an estimated 80% of the country's workforce in both the formal and informal sectors. We also know that the country is still in a recession, and it has some of the highest unemployment figures since unemployment data started being gathered. What do you think the role of this Eskom situation has been in exacerbating the situation of unemployment, the situation with the recession, and how it's been affecting these small and medium-scale businesses that employ so many South Africans?
There is a direct correlation with the power outages as well as the unemployment rate, because the effect that power outages create on production, that it diminishes production. And when there is a decrease in production, you don't really need much of a labor force. And that directly impacts the ability of creating new employment and the ability of sustaining current. And so it has a direct material effect, and there's a direct correlation between those two. The unemployment numbers, as we see in South Africa, is quite high now, with unemployment numbers sitting at 32.6%. And that's the official definition. That really includes people that are actively looking for employment. When you look at the real numbers, you see that young people in South Africa account for 74.7% of unemployment rate, which is characterized by a rate of black people, characterized by the number of women, young women, who are of the African race, who are also unemployed, I beg your pardon. So there are so many layers to what is going on, and is materially affected by the load shedding and the ability to create sustainable jobs that are going to assist with creating the necessary demand for households to create wealth within the South African economy.
I'm going to ask you this question. I know I've asked you before. I'll probably ask you in another month or so. But in terms of the solution to Eskom's issues, where does it lie? We've seen a price increase, a tariff for the electricity. As you mentioned earlier, a large percentage of Africans across the continent may not actually be able to pay the market price for electricity as it may be, which is one of the reasons you believe that governments still have a role to play in that part of things. But when you look at it overall, we've heard from the finance minister in South Africa that no more money is going to go towards bailing Eskom out. There is a rescue plan. There was the rescue operation that South Africa that Eskom is also part of. Where is the solution in terms of getting a handle on what ails Eskom? Because as long as Eskom is sick, it's going to affect South Africa's economy.
Absolutely. The proposed tariff of the National Energy Regulator of 10.6% to come into effect on the 1st of July for electricity is unwarranted. I'm paying 10.6% more for energy and electricity, which I'm not getting full service of. So I think, in as much as the intended idea with the tariff is to assist Eskom financially to be able to generate power, and particularly be able to manage the technical glitches that they have, and be able to successfully do the maintenance of those power stations. We don't have the confidence that that will be value for our money, that 10.6 tariff is not value for our money, because we understand that the state just recently could have regenerated and redistributed the funds from something an SOE like SAA, and put that influx of the state funds back into something that has the ability to change the growth trajectory of this economy. So I do think that the government of where we choose to take state funds to solve state enterprise problems becomes a challenge for South Africa's government.
Right. It is a conversation that is ongoing, of course, because as long as this is affecting South Africa's economy, it will hamper the South African economy's growth as well. But it's always a pleasure, Ntombana Mbele. Thank you so much for joining me on Business Edge.
Thank you for having me.
And as we wrap things up, we're going to go straight into NC4 To Watch. And let's give you a few stories we are keeping our eyes on with NC4 To Watch. Now, we start in Uganda, where the Uganda business activity slightly declined in May. Analysts believe it is reacting to build up of anxiety brought about by the surge in COVID-19 cases. However, it remained way above average, with notable increase in new orders, output, and employment. We move to Ghana now, where the inflation rate has dropped to a record low in May. It fell below the middle of the central bank's target range. Consumer inflation slowed to 7.5% from 8.5% in April, which is the lowest since the start of 2013, according to the government statistician Samuel Anim. And now Libya, which has cut crude production by nearly 20% due to maintenance at its largest oil field and leaks on pipelines linking other desert deposits to the Mediterranean coast. The OPEC producer began reducing outputs at fields operated by the Waha Oil Company over the last 2 days because of the leaks. And finally, Royal Dutch Shell, Nigeria's arm, is urging the government in Abuja to pass the long-delayed petroleum industry bill into law. Now, this legislation is expected to reform the country's petroleum industry, and the Senate is expected to further deliberate on the bill sometime this month. And that's it on NC4 To Watch, which brings us to the end of today's edition of Business Edge. Many thanks for watching. Don't forget that you can follow us on all of our social media platforms, download our mobile app on your Play Store and App Store, and of course, take us with you wherever you go. You can watch us live on StarTimes Channel 274 and Avo Channel 23. I'm Tolulope Adeleru-Balogun. But I need to let you know, we are joining South Africa live, where South African President Cyril Ramaphosa is speaking about the economy. This is News Central.